We've got 27 in the room, so we're going to get started here. Welcome to another live stream. It is a Sunday, and I was not here last week. I was up north. I did post a video about that on my Vault channel. So if you don't know, I've got a second channel. Talked to somebody the other day, and I said, I've got that on my other channel. Like, what other channel? I said, well, I've got another channel. So check out the Vault channel. I shot a video from the balcony of the Laurium Manor Inn and explained what I was doing up there last weekend. I spoke at a fundraiser for Big Annie of Calumet fame during the strike of 1913. She was a hero, and they're trying to raise money now to build a statue of her. So they're going to do that. And I spoke at a fundraiser. I stayed at the Laurium Manor Inn, which is a really, really cool place up there. Had a lot of fun. So there you go. So got to say hello to everybody who's checking in real early. Emmanuel, thank you for checking in, my friend. Ram 50 V8, Dr. Rick, Irving Johnson checking in. DePaul, of course, good friend of mine. Perfect weather, says Irving Johnson. And it's a little chilly here, but, it comes and goes in Michigan. We get chilly, and then we have, like yesterday was in the 80s and humid. And today it's windy and 60. Although I look outside right now, and I don't see as much wind as I saw earlier. Don't actually see the wind, but you see its effect on the trees. And I've got trees near where I live. So aren't I lucky? Carl's Corner. Hello, Steve. Hello, Carl. Scramble North, Brian Anderson, Kevin Hawthorne from Lakeland, Florida, where the Detroit Tigers play spring ball, as they say. Dave Rogers checking in from Wichita. David Art 1000. Good afternoon and happy Sunday to you. South Florida DCL. I wonder what DCL stands for. Of course, there's a College of Law in Detroit that goes by those initials. Lowell Riggs, I made sure to tell us that's how you pronounce that name. Nora Technology is my favorite lawyer. Most people don't have a favorite lawyer, but thank you. Larry Lucero, what do you think of the Chevron doctrine going down in flames? I'm going to do a video on that one of these days. I just haven't read the full opinion yet. And a Supreme Court opinion of that nature, I will read from front to back, including all the dissents, and that way I can comment on it more thoroughly. Happy Cat 3096 is goodbye June. Today, of course, is the last of June, as I like to say. Trace Gomez checking in from Munich, Germany, home of the Olympics back in 1972. I remember them vividly. Code Meister Beats as hot as you know what here in North Carolina. Ed Canui, hello, Steve. And I don't know if that's Canui or Canoe. I had a friend in high school whose last name was spelled Knue, and she pronounced it Canui. So I don't know if that's correct or not. People often have family pronunciations that they do, which may or may not be correct. Like I say Lehto, and in Finland, they don't say that. Scott Argyle checking in from the Oregon coast, and Jonathan Irwin from the land of Lincoln. Springfield, Illinois. Chuck Whitehead from Jonesboro, Tennessee. Pat Z from Southern Texas. Scott Summers. Won my rear. Not quite sure what that means, but then again, there are things here that I do not understand. Cameron Freiner, good morning from California. Missouri. There's a town called Florida in Michigan. Most people don't know about it. It's a really tiny little town just outside of Calumet. Lowell Riggs says, Hannes Oman, most of my family is in Bergen. And Dave Mayberry is checking from Springfield, but Oregon. Springfield, Oregon. Of course, a lot of Springfields across America, which is one of the jokes in The Simpsons, is that they don't ever really explicitly say what state they're in, but they joke about it all the time. Matthew Shostrom, have you heard of our part-time cricket team beating all of the other countries' full-time teams? I heard a little bit about it, but I'll admit I do not follow cricket. I don't even understand cricket. Linda Dune, Fredericksburg, Virginia here. Thank you for checking in. I may have mispronounced your last name, and I apologize. Stargazer Kauai, Heather from Wyoming. Sam Stritzel from Wisconsin. Ron LeMaster from West Virginia. Oh, nice. Matt says, you changed your chair to a wooden one. What happened to the metal one in the background? No, it was actually, it's metal and plastic. But we don't talk about the chair. Southwest Houston, Texas. Hi. Oh, Redneck Coder says, don't forget Wyoming, Michigan. No, of course I wouldn't forget Wyoming, Michigan. Over there by Grand Rapids. Oh, Lockdown Losses, Florida, home of Abby Normal Law. Abby Normal. Outdoor Bass. Morning from OKC. Lowell Riggs M, have you ever been to Greenfield Village? Of course. You can't grow up in southeastern Michigan without going there on at least one field trip. But I've gone there as an adult many times because, of course, it's the Henry Ford Museum. Greenfield Village is next to it. And the Henry Ford Museum is one of the greatest car museums in the world. They've got a turbine car. They got a Tucker. They got all kinds of stuff. They got Lincoln's. They got Kennedy's car that he was riding in Dallas. So, I mean, it's an amazing museum. And Greenfield Village is also cool because Henry Ford decided that it would be cool to preserve some history by showing what life was like back in the old days. And he gathered up buildings and churches and blacksmith shops and things like that just to show you what things were like in the old days. And he created a little village, and so you can walk around through it and see what life was like and in 3 dimensions. Ed Canoe now says it is pronounced canoe. Okay, I'm glad I spotted that. Lewis Browning, afternoon professor. Thank you, my friend. You know, you can always call me professor because I did teach for 10 years. And once you're a professor, it's like being a judge or being in the military. You know, you can always be your honor, even if you've retired. So I might go back to teach someday, but I don't have direct plans on that. So we'll see. KD214 says, I grew up on the south side of Dearborn Heights. I'm not sure. Is that really radically different than the west side of Dearborn Heights? He's just pointing that out. Lockdown losses. Who doesn't want a Tucker torpedo? I know I do. Well, of course, you got to remember it's not called a Tucker torpedo. It was originally going to be called a Tucker torpedo, but they gave up that name real early on. And for some odd reason, people don't like the fact that the Tucker was called a 48. And of course, that was the year it was going to be launched. That was going to be its model year. And so you tell people it's a Tucker 48, and I've been corrected. They go, oh, no, Steve, it's a Tucker torpedo. It's called a torpedo. No, it was not called a torpedo. But I understand what you're getting at. Don't worry about it. I'm simply pointing that out. Tom Gensel from Flushing, Michigan. I know where that is quite well. Mr. Pete, 1985. Hi, Steve. Hello, Mr. Pete. Greetings from not Asbury Park, New Jersey. David Zarodontansky pointing out, of course, that Greetings from is, I believe, an album. With some music on it. Prince Albert's, is that where Fordlandia was supposed to be? I'm not sure if that's a reference to something Ford is building himself, or are we talking about he tried to build a model city in South America, I know at one point, because he wanted to get his own rubber supply. Because at one point in time, Henry Ford thought, boy, to get cost down in cars, let's build everything, including the glass. Let's make our own steel. And I mean, there's still the Ford Rouge plant. I mean, you know, and so at one point he said, I'm not even going to get my own rubber. So, Dave Mayberry says, I named my band Bad Axe by throwing a dart at a map, but it didn't last. Well, there actually was a band called Bad Axe that put out a record, at least one record, but they weren't from Bad Axe, and it didn't take. So, Janie Segrist says, I tried sending you a story, but it kicked it back as undeliverable. Did you send it to steve@lehtoslaw.com? Because even spam, it'll go to my spam folder, but I'll still see it. Mark Mishlowitz says, it is upsetting to see my old toys and cars I've owned at Henry Ford Museum. Henry Ford Museum, I was there just a couple years ago, and they had a display on the 80s. And so, like, they had a thing showing MTV, and they had a thing of, like, records of, like, you know, the Go-Go's. And, you start asking yourself, wait, are we supposed to be putting these things in museums just yet? Robar Inc., do you do criminal law also? Not in my practice, no. I have handled criminal law cases, but I stopped doing that. I've laser focused my practice on nothing but lemon law for automobiles in Michigan. So I know a lot about other fields of law. I've handled criminal law cases. I've tried criminal law cases. I've actually gone to jury trials on them, but I haven't done that in a while. Anonmouse says, I thought it was Steve Lehto Esquire. That's acceptable also. You can be known by more than one thing. You can also just call me Steve. Just don't call me Steven with a PH. Lowell Riggs, I am. What's the weirdest case you've been offered? That's an interesting question because I actually was just talking about this with somebody the other day. And there's a case I can't talk about. Someday I'll see if I can. But there was one case that I wanted to take, but the person didn't hire me. And then they wound up not pursuing it. It was such a missed opportunity. DG1, are you in favor of qualified immunity? If you watch my channel, you know the answer to that is no. I routinely wear shirts that say abolish qualified immunity. I've done all kinds of videos on qualified immunity and why I think it's wrong. I also support the Institute for Justice, and one of their big causes is to get qualified immunity undone So I am not in favor of qualified immunity, but thank you for asking. Joe 65, hello from Commerce Township. I was actually over that way just the other day. A friend of mine is having a garage sale. This is actually funny. A friend of mine is having a garage sale. And I'm standing in his garage, and the guy walks in and goes, "Hey, I know you." And I didn't think they were talking to me at first because it's a garage sale. I thought maybe they're talking to my friend or something. The guy goes, "No, I know you," pointing at me. The funny part was he goes, but I can't place it. And he starts asking questions. Where'd you grow up? Were you in the Boy Scouts? Things like that. And then finally I go, YouTube. And he goes, "Oh my God, you're Steve Lehto. You're Steve Lehto." So yes, indeed, I am Steve Lehto. Oh, Linda Dune. I have a family who live in Muskegon, so I'm familiar with Michigan. And yes, you got the name right. Well, thank you. Thank you. Jerry C, any metal detecting yet this summer? No. In fact, I haven't even gotten the detector out this year. But I got it out last year one time, only one time. And the funny thing is I found an Indian head penny. The year before, I got it out one time, and I found a bunch of stuff because I came across a perfect spot. I'm like, oh, I got to go get my detector. And I found a large penny, 5 Indian heads, and a buffalo nickel in the space of about 100 yards on a street. So Chris Curry says, "I love your videos. When my wife tries to show me a wacky court case, I can be smug and say I already know about it from Steve." Oh, thank you. Matthew Showstrom, if you could snap your fingers and either institute term limits, age limits for Congress, or get rid of qualified immunity, which would you do? I get rid of qualified immunity. I think term limits are an interesting idea, but the problem, of course, is that they're written into the Constitution. So states can pass term limits on their state government, but the federal government, you can't do that without amending the Constitution. Now, I understand that you could amend the Constitution and you can snap your fingers if you have magical powers and make it happen. But in reality, if people don't want somebody in office for so many years, you can vote them out. I understand what happens. I understand that. So Lewis Browning, I want to see all the treasures that don't make it to the set. Most everything does. Once in a while, things don't, or they work their way through pretty quickly. So, and I have to point out, can I reach without pulling my microphone out? Hang on. But there was the guy who sent me this, and this, of course, is the artificial intelligence rendering of what would have happened if the woodchuck had actually gotten control of my Viper. And I believe this is exactly what it would look like. Exactly. And it's pretty cool. He sent it to me, but I don't have room for something that large on this set. So that was very cool. But I try to mention the things on camera once or twice. And I've had people tell me they sent me a t-shirt and they go, "I never saw my t-shirt." And I go, "Which one was it?" And they tell me, I go, "I've worn it 3 times, and so you got, I know I don't expect everyone to watch every video, although it would be nice, wouldn't it? But there's a good chance that you may have missed it if you missed one in there. So Redneck Coder says Montana tried to impose term limits on its U.S. reps and senators, and it got struck down as unconstitutional. And that would happen. And I mean, that's something that we've discussed. Michigan passed term limits on many of the elected officials back in, I believe, the early 1990s. And it causes a really weird problem because you see this where somebody goes and they run for the House of Representatives, which I think you can run for 3 times. They do that. Then they're term limited out. So then they run for Senate. They get elected 2 times, which they're allowed to do. And then they cycle through all these different, it's like this career path. And it's pretty clear that no matter what you do, there's going to be upsides and downsides to it. So we'll see. Berserk Dirk says, term limits, as good as they sound, are inherently non-democratic. No, I agree with you. That's the point, is that if you don't want somebody in that long, vote them out. So, but that... I'm not saying I think this is a problem that needs to be corrected, but people do have a tendency to vote for familiar names. And there are some examples. I watched an American Greed yesterday about, I forgot the guy's name, but he was a congressman from California who got elected because his dad was elected. And basically on name recognition, he got elected. And the first thing he did when he got into Congress was start spending his campaign money on personal things. And he wound up getting in trouble for that. And the guy wasn't qualified to go to Washington. He just wasn't. But people elected him because they're like, well, I know his dad is, he must be good too. So, oh, Lewis Browning says, what's with the spam Hot Wheels? Somebody sent in all that spam stuff. I got a bunch of spam stuff back there now. MH08 says it's 299 degrees and sunny in Denver, but he's talking about in the Kelvin scale. Absolute zero, of course. Oh. Jay Abbott says, I love Steve's lives and checking up on the chair situation. Now, Janie Seacrest said, wait, did the AI art get the squirrel fingers right? Well, it was a woodchuck. You can't really see if there's a thumb over there or not, because that's what a lot of times people automatically draw thumbs onto animals, but I don't think a woodchuck's got thumbs, but we'll see how that goes. Stephen Nikovich, do you plan on doing any videos on the recent SCOTUS decision, like Chevron or Grants Pass? Chevron, absolutely. Grants Pass, I'm not sure. That one doesn't ring a bell, but then again, a lot of stuff's come down in the last few days. I will get to them all eventually. Shannon Peace is someone who was elected locally here because his last name was the same as a famous political family with no relation. Oh, I can tell you right now, one of the biggest problems you have in Michigan, in Wayne County in particular, and Oakland County, if you have an Irish last name, you run for judge. The number of people named O'Brien and Callahan who became judges in those places, who are all unrelated to each other. No one knows why. But if you just get your name on the ballot, and there was even a woman down there whose last name would only be that if she adopted her husband's last name, and she didn't use it professionally until she ran for judge. Then she quickly adopted it and said, oh, by the way, I'm one of these now. Extra large Garfield throws in some swag money. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I of course, will give you the shout out. And I like the name Extra Large Garfield. Wasn't Garfield, wasn't it one of the running jokes that he may have been a little extra large to begin with because he liked that lasagna so much? Southwest Houston, Texas, says there needs to be term limits for Supreme Court justices. Yes and no. I mean, I understand the concept, but I'm going to tell you right now that if you look at the way the Constitution is set up, you got the House of Reps for 2 years, you got the president for 4 years, you got the senators for 6, and the federal judges and the judiciary is lifetime. And they purposely have all these things staggered like that to keep it from happening where, everything swings this way for a while, then it swings this way for a while, then it swings this way. And it does give it some stability. Now, the question is, are lifetime appointments the correct thing, or should it be like maybe 10 years or something? I don't know. And of course, none of the federal justices are quote unquote elected. They're, of course, nominated and then confirmed by the Senate. So there's a whole thing there as well. But hey, David Domini Fowler is in the house. Good afternoon, Steve. Good afternoon, David. I've got to tell you right now, I'm gonna shift gears like I'm working a Muncie Rock Crusher and tell you guys that Mr. Fowler is the guitar player in Aussie Pink Floyd. And he's the one who got me backstage to their show at the Music Hall in Detroit. I got to watch the sound check. He gave me a tour of the stage. He gave me a tour of their tour bus. I sat in the audience mesmerized at how good these guys are. I met members of the band also that he introduced me to, watched the entire show, then went backstage after the show. We talked until I'm guessing midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. And of course, Mr. Fowler is from England. I'm from, I think, America. Yeah, America. And we were just talking about stuff because he's in this band that tours internationally, Aussie Pink Floyd. And I cannot stress this enough. If you like Pink Floyd and these guys come to town, go see them because they reproduce those songs that you heard off of Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, Division Bell, The Wall. They reproduce those songs note for note. You can go onto YouTube and find the videos. And by the way, I didn't know until he told me, but David also produces their videos. He's a multi-talented guy. And you watch their videos and then watch a Pink Floyd video, go back and forth. The sound is identical. It's identical. It's amazing. It's amazing. And so I'm not a musician. I'll admit that I'm not a musician, but I know people who are. And so I've been to enough live shows to tell you I know what I'm talking about when I see these guys. And I tell you, if you go and you like Pink Floyd, you'll be blown away by the show. So, David, thanks for checking in. They're on tour right now. I think they were just recently in North Carolina or something. I've been following them a little bit since then. But thank you for checking in. And you got any questions or comments, dude, fire away. I'm glad to have you in the room. So that's David Dominique Fowler, the guitar player. In the videos, who's often standing on the far right of the stage. And it was a blast to meet you. He introduced me to members of the band, and the whole experience is very, very cool. So thank you very much, my friend. And that's enough for that little plug there. Steve Berwanger, would the SCOTUS decision on Chevron also descend to state agencies? I don't believe so, because I think it was talking about whether or not Congress had authorized what had happened in Chevron versus how they ruled now. So, but I haven't read it yet, so I have to admit that. Andrew Lee, hello from Nome, Alaska. And thank you for checking in. Of course, a couple weekends ago, I held up on camera some of the stuff that was sent in from Nome and Mr. Lee. Thank you there. Duncan Campbell, hello, Steve from Australia. Thomas Crane, which car you had was your all-time favorite? I have to go with the Viper. I've got two really cool cars, a Viper and a Cobra, and I got to go with the Viper. But it's a close one. I like that Cobra a lot too. So Mark Miller says, not pitching merch or anything, but if you all need a graphic artist, eShirt Labs is a strong graphic artist. Never heard of him, but I've heard of Mark Miller. So that's cool. Oh, Stephen Nikovich says Grants passes about the homeless encampments on public property and the ability of cities to enforce no camping laws. Okay. That would be cool. I'll read that. I remember that went to the Supreme Court, and of course, that's a huge fight. And I've said this before. Someone's asked that question just generically. What do you think about the laws that they do to try to enforce, rules against people setting up tents in public spaces because they're homeless? And the whole point is that, well, on the one hand, they're homeless. They got to go someplace, but where are they going to go? So I have not read the opinion yet, though. Lewis Browning says, I did. Spam Can Bank, Cobra Hot Wheel, Barrister Judge Hound, Michigan flag sticker made it the set that for. Well, thank you, my friend. I appreciate that. Tim Nossum says, Kwame Kilpatrick sounds Irish. Yeah, if you'd run for judge, you would have gotten elected. Kwame Kilpatrick was the Detroit mayor who was chased out of office in absolute shame because of what he did. And he went to a federal prison for a while. I think he's out now, but oh my. There was a time when he was a rock star. He was the hip hop mayor of Detroit. And it turns out that, he was doing some things that were inappropriate while in office, shall we say. Ed G, hello from the Poconos. Good to see a live stream today. Missed you not having one last week. I apologize. I did run up north. I talked about that at the top of the show. I ran up north to do a fundraiser in Calumet, and I stayed at the Laurium Manor Inn. Also, while there, I did run by the Douglas Houghton Falls and shoot some video, and those are both on my Vault channel. That is I shot a video from the porch of the Laurium Manor Inn, and I shot a video out at Douglas Houghton Falls. I did not record my talk, and I had somebody ask me that earlier today, and I said, hey, Steve, do you have a copy of or a video of your speech that you gave at the fundraiser for Big Annie? I spoke for about half an hour. And I did not record it. And, once in a while, I have this choice. I mean, I've got recording equipment everywhere. I've got video cameras. I could record it if I wanted to. But my concern always is that where I'm really concerned about making something where I'm speaking come across well, I really want to be sharp. I want to be on the best game. And whenever I'm being recorded, I'm conscious of it. And it does change the thought process going on in here. And so I knew that if I recorded the talk, it might affect my ability to deliver it as well as I could. So I chose not to. Likewise, I did not record my talk at the Institute for Justice last year. I could have recorded that as well. But, I wanted to, again, be at the best I could be when I was talking. So there you go. Extra large Garfield says I'm bigger than regular Garfield. But isn't regular Garfield kind of large? Oh boy, it's one of those things. Joe Bonchi, which do you prefer, judges to be elected or appointed? That's an interesting question because in Michigan, everybody is elected all the way up to the Michigan Supreme Court. And I'm not sure we get great results doing that either. So I don't know, but it's I don't know as a correct answer to that, and I'm not even sure if I have a thought on beyond that. Um, Mark Miller says, "What about 13 federal districts? So you have 13 Supreme Courts. Well, then you'd have splits in the Supreme District Courts that would never get resolved. And so the point on the Supreme Court is that they resolve the splits between the circuits. So we'll see." Grubby old Patriot says, "I looked down my driveway and found a fresh woodchuck skull and some bits of fur. I think it could be the foxes that roam around my property. I've got coyotes on my property. And so I can't believe that the woodchucks are just running amok as they are, but I have not seen any in a couple weeks. So I've been happy. I've been happy. But if they start coming back or getting in my garage or trying to drive my cars, then I might have to step up my game. But as it is right now, I'm thinking that nature will keep this in balance. I've got at least 2 coyotes on my property, and I know that because I picked them both up in one shot from the same camera at the same time, meaning that there's 2 coyotes. Oh, 1, 2. Okay, I got at least 2, right? Oh. The Sentinel points out the Constitution can be amended. However, our founders required that the process be difficult. The Constitution should not be changed at a whim to man's ambitions. Well, yeah, and obviously you don't want to change it with just the mood of a group of people. Hey, let's change this, let's change that. There are some states where amendments are relatively easy compared to the U.S. Constitution, and they occasionally get amended quite a bit. So, but they're all different processes, and there's real not necessarily a correct answer on any of this that you check like mathematically. Philip Reed asks, "What do you think is the funniest story involving a semi that you have?" Well, I've represented a couple of guys who bought defective semis back in the day. Michigan's lemon law does not cover them, but other laws do. And I had a guy who had a very, very defective, brand new semi right when they first came out with that new diesel exhaust scrubbing technology. And that's not funny. But I don't think. Well, actually, there was something funny about that. That's the one case where I sued the 3 defendants: the engine manufacturer and the drivetrain, like a chassis or something. Anyways, there are 3 different companies that were involved in the manufacture of this gigantic semi, and I sued all 3 of them. And one of the problems was with the dashboard. There's a problem in the dashboard, and every defendant claimed it was not their dashboard. And so I went to a settlement conference before the case settled, and it did settle. But and at the settlement conference, they were asked, "Well, if it's not yours, whose is it?" Every single one of them did one of these. Well, it's not mine, but it's one of theirs. It's not mine. Look, my client didn't go out and install his own dashboard. Okay, it came with the vehicle. I have a sneaky feeling that whoever put this thing together and put their name on it, it's their dashboard. But it didn't matter. We didn't go to trial. The case settled. So okay, it jumped on me. I literally have the scrolling wheel, and I'm scrolling really, really slowly, and all of a sudden, bam, and it jumps on me. So there you go. David Dominic Fowler says, "Cheers, Steve, flying back to the UK today for a few weeks." Oh, that's right. So these guys tour, and they tour hard. Boom, boom, boom. Different cities every single night. The whole show gets moved, set it up, tear it down, move it. And then I was looking at their schedule, and all of a sudden I see this big chunk of time where nothing's happening basically in the month of July. So apparently these guys get the summer off. David can go home, enjoy himself, hang out for a while, relax. And if I know him, that means he's going to be pulling out his guitars and playing, editing video, and probably working on something else because he's one of these guys who's got a whole bunch of interest going on. But then they're going to come back and do some more touring in North America, I believe. including in the Midwest and out far west, up and down the coast. So if you're in the area, meaning North America, go to Aussie Floyd's website. Just Google Aussie Floyd, Aussie Pink Floyd, and you'll find them. And check out their schedule, see who they're coming. And like I said, I assure you, you'll enjoy it. Johnny Fradley says there's no dark side of the moon. Matter of fact, it's all dark. Depends on your definition, but of course, we're talking about Dark Side of the Moon as in the title by Pink Floyd of an album they put out that did very, very well. Not a banned account says, how can judges ban defense arguments they dislike? Well, arguably, they can ban stuff that's inappropriate, right? But they're not supposed to ban them because they dislike them. They're supposed to be banning them because they're inappropriate. So, like let's suppose you were to put somebody on trial for, I don't know, an assassination, and they want to argue it was self-defense. A judge could say, I'm not going to let you argue that while you were up in that tower taking pot shots at a politician, literally like this, that was self-defense. And people will ask and say, well, if it's a stupid argument, who cares? There's a fine line between stupid arguments and relevant arguments and irrelevant arguments. So Mark Agamotto 1313 Smith says, given that the POTUS is 4 years and a 2-term max, 24-year limit on SCOTUS, which would be a 3 POTUS changeover minimum. Yeah, but I would argue and make it an odd number. Make it an odd number so it would never match up, or it would match up so rarely, So Carl's Corner says, I've seen Floyd play for real tickets are probably the same price. No, I don't think so. I think if you want to go see the real Pink Floyd play, if they come around, those tickets will be a lot more expensive. I'm pretty sure. But again, I haven't priced them lately because Pink Floyd hasn't toured near me in a while. And by the way, QA Library is discussing with Lowell Riggs IM about what's happening with the elections in England. And apparently there's a lot of stuff going on. My good friend Mark Phillips been updating me on that. And apparently there's a big thing coming politically with some possible changes. So we'll see what happens. But Scott Rolla says, Steve for president. I've told you before, I don't want that job. I don't want that job. And the reason is, I'm convinced that this is one of the problems in America, is the way that political campaigns happen. Okay. And so you run for any office. You can run for local drain commissioner. Someone's going to start running attack ads against you. But you can imagine what they do when you run for president. So Mind Ben asks when they're going to be back to Detroit. I've looked through their recent schedule, again, talking about Aussie Pink Floyd, and I don't see Detroit being scheduled anytime soon because they do cover a lot of ground between dates. But you can, like I said, visit their website and check that out. Larry Lucero says cars are now garbage, and I don't think it's the car companies. I really think it is the laws when it comes to the emissions. The companies have to cut costs in order to keep up with the cost. That's part of it. I mean, just think about the cost added to a car by requiring airbags, certain kinds of bumpers, things like that. It does drive the cost of the cars up. But you and I both know there's also a race to the bottom with respect to some aspects of cars that have gotten just cheap. And, there are more accountants interfering with car design than there are designers with bad taste. So, not a banned account says, where is standing doctrine in the Constitution? I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but I can tell you that standing, the idea of having standing to bring a lawsuit, has been around since time immemorial. Read A History of the Common Law, for instance. And they've always said that for you to bring a lawsuit, you must have standing. And so without standing, you can't bring a lawsuit. So if you get in a car accident, I can't file a lawsuit and go, hey, he got in a car accident. I want to sue on his behalf. I don't have standing. You do, so I think when the drafters of the Constitution put it together, they were understanding that a lot of what they're talking about was understood to be based in the common law. Doug Wallace, hello, Steve from Arkansas. Sad tiger, hello. Why would a tiger be sad? Wouldn't tigers be happy? Oh, I guess they're not the king of the jungle, so. Oh. Jerry C. I live in Muncie, Indiana. Sadly, the old Warner Gear plant where the rock crusher was made was torn down. A victim of the auto industry downsizing and jobs moving out of the country. And of course, I joked earlier when I said I was going to change gears here radically, as if I'm shifting a Muncie rock crusher. Muncie rock crusher was a standard shift manual transmission made in Muncie, Indiana, and used in some cars. And they called it a rock crusher because it tended to have louder gear noise than other ones. However, my understanding is that it was because it was built more robustly, meaning that you wanted a rock crusher and you didn't care about the little bit of extra noise. And one of my brothers at one point in time had a car, and I think it was a Camaro with a Muncie rock crusher. But I met so many people who said, "Oh, I've got the Muncie rock crusher." And it became one of those things like, how can you tell without climbing underneath and looking at it? So Linda Dune, my first car was a 1981 Chevette. Tiny, noisy, with a hole in the floor, but it was my high school wheels back then. One of my brothers had a Chevette, and it was a little tiny thing. They all were. And he drove that thing just endlessly. And at one point, he quit driving. He gave it to another brother of mine. And I know at one point in time where the shocks were mounted, you pop the hood and there's a big bolt where the shock tower comes through. That piece of metal on both sides had rusted to the point where they'd broken. And he had welded in these metal straps and basically had rigged this thing together to keep driving it. I mean, we're in Michigan, right? These things aren't designed to last that long. It's a disposable car. But man, he got his money's worth out of that car. Jason Gilman says, we got some more drone litigation in the pipeline, this time against U of M. I believe that your attorney sent me a note about that, or the attorney on the case sent me a note about that, and I will cover that one of these days. I will. Not a banned account says, if homelessness is illegal, why not deport them? Well, if they're U.S. citizens, they get to stay here. Why would we deport people who simply break the law? That's, so. Joel Kirschenman asks the question I get asked a lot. Did you take one of your fun cars up to the UP last week? No, I did not. I was going to be up there for 3-4 days. And I can't always count on the weather. So the Cobra is out. You can't drive the Cobra any place where you might get rained on because it doesn't have a roof. And the Viper, I didn't want to bring that because, number one, I brought a boatload of books with me. Boatload, not the other word. And I visited a bunch of stores that sell my books, and I brought 15 cases of books, and I couldn't have fit 15 cases of books in my Viper. But also, when I'm up there, I often do explore back roads and dirt roads and logging trails. And I'm not going to be driving my Viper around on a logging trail out at the tip of the Keweenaw Peninsula with 12 cases of books waiting me down. So there you go. David A. Palomares asks, if a lawyer dog was a thing, what kind of breed would it be? And what law would it specialize in? I would picture it being either a very thoughtful dog or a very, very determined dog. So I would have guessed most likely a shepherd of some sort, an Australian shepherd perhaps. But a person did send me a really nice AI rendering of 2 lawyer dogs, and they looked kind of like Great Danes, and that worked too. So that, I'm guessing, is what we think. So, Edie, have you ever thought about running for political office yourself? No, not seriously. No. Lewis Browning, what books do you have for sale? I just ordered Death's Door. Right now, I actually have some Turban Car books. Got about a dozen of those. I've got the Tucker book. I've got the American Murder Houses book, and I got Death's Door. So I got those 4 books. I do have some Turban Car books. I got like a dozen of them, maybe. So if anybody wants one, email me directly. When they're gone, because that's one that I get cases of them from a manufacturer from time to time. My publisher, and I just happen to have some right now. So there you go. Jay Abate says it could be multiple kinds. So Chihuahuas, for instance, could do med mal. Don't Mind Me points out there's two sides to every argument. And he says, just imagine if that ruling were the other way. They would affirm a right to homeless people camping anywhere they want on public property. So Redneck Coder says Woodchucks Amok would be a good band name. Woodchucks Amok. And thank you for spelling amok correctly. A lot of people get that wrong. Joe Bonchi says, thank you for pronouncing my last name right. Did I pronounce your name earlier? Or did I get it right previously? Bradley B, are there any roadrunners in your property? No, but I've got rabbits. I've got rabbits like you wouldn't believe. I got so many rabbits in my property. It's scary. And again, I don't know what the coyotes and the foxes are doing because they're letting those rabbits run amok. So Don't Mind Me says Steve used to be a radio DJ. He's a trained speaking professional. Oh, I should put that on my business cards. Trained speaking professional. When I was on the air at WTRX in Flint, I was half of a morning show with a guy named Scott Barner. And the show is called Barner and Lehto, which is terribly creative. And we used to do these commercials, 30-second commercials, or little mini plays. And they would always be us. Remember this on the radio. They would always be us saving the day. And at the very end, Scott Barner would say in this really deep voice, Barner and Lehto, they're trained DJs. Like as if that means something. Oh, Viper Mike S says you started early. Well, yes or no. I mean, we started a few minutes early, but we often do. But I'll always be here till 2:00. So it's more a matter of that's bonus time for people who show up early. ML Culpepper, which is worse, HOA or condo boards? And believe it or not, I've gotten grief for not specifying the distinction between the two because quite often they're the same. But I do think more people who get into condos anticipate dealing with a condo board more so than they buy a home in an HOA, because in the condo, you know that you only own portions and other portions are owned collectively. But I've been on a condo board and I did it for 1 year and hated it. And then I moved out of the condos within a year or two after that. So it's a pain. It jumped on me again. Oh, I hate that. I hope I didn't miss anybody who paid some money to get me to talk about them, but Gabadisu, do you ship to freight forwarders? Also, is a signed copy a possibility? I sign the books. That's a done deal unless you tell me not to. But I have to ship to U.S. postal addresses because I ship via U.S. mail. So they have to be domestic. I can't send them to other countries. I apologize. I've had people beg me to ship a book to Canada or to Australia. I shipped one to Australia once, and it was I could have gotten on a plane and flown it there. I could have bought a plane and flown it there for less. And I'm like, if you really want to, but it's something I have a hard time justifying, even if you tell me you want to, because it's more to ship than the book costs. So, Jay Abbott says, I'd cast an Afghan hound as the judge. Those are stately dogs. They look very, very, very stately. Taco Cats. My wife got a vet for her 16th birthday. On her first day driving it, she had a horse outside of Battle Creek, a Chevy Chevette. And of course, that's funny because a Chevette and a Corvette, you could theoretically call them both vets. Oh. Drew Outdoors says, hey, thoughts on the Karen Reed case? I'm not following it at all. I apologize. There's a few that I don't. A few cases I don't follow just because I don't have time. Jay Superman says, rabbits are good eating. I dated a woman years ago whose dad kept rabbits for that purpose. He had a bunch of cages of rabbits out back. And every now and then they'd say, "Hey, we're having rabbits tomorrow night." And I'm like, it's hard for me. Don't get me wrong. And I know where meat comes from. I understand that. It's a different thing when they call out to her father and say, "Go get some rabbits." And he walks out back and walks back in 3 minutes later with these rabbits that were, I don't know. It's like watching sausage get made. Quentin James says Ginger or Marianne. We've discussed this before, but not recently. An obvious answer to that is Marianne. I always thought, like, were the producers serious? Like, they actually thought Ginger was the hot one? But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I don't. Sassy Letty one says, Steve, you are the man. Props to you. Well, thank you. Of course, you might just be being sassy. I don't know. Redneck Coder says, at this point, I'm okay with victim blaming when it comes to Hertz. So am I. Every time I read a Hertz story these days, I read the story and I ask myself, do these people own computers? Do they not know that this stuff happens? How do they not know this could happen to them? It's like assumption of the risk. There's a concept in the law called assumption of the risk, where if you do something dangerous and you go, I didn't know it was dangerous. Wait, you didn't know jumping out of an airplane was dangerous with a parachute. Okay. You didn't know that playing in a construction site was dangerous if you're an adult. You didn't, seriously? Okay, you rented a car from Hertz and you got arrested. I'm surprised it didn't list that as one of the things that will happen to you on your ticket. You know, the thing that when you rented the car. Oh, Rex Foucher, do you think HOAs or condo boards should be outlawed altogether? No, they can't be. It's a contractual agreement. This is the biggest problem. I have so many people ask me. They go, Steve, they should outlaw HOAs right now. Just outlaw them. Well, you can't. It's a contractual agreement between two people, and it's a legal contract. And so what they need to do to clean this area up is they need to make sure that it's disclosed properly. So in Michigan, when you buy or sell a piece of property, there's a document that gets handed from one to the other that says, is this property within an HOA? Yes or no? And if that box is checked yes, and you just discovered that at the closing, you might have an issue. But you're required to get those documents 3 days before the closing, or maybe it's a day before, but before the closing. So Don Kindred says, greetings from West Lafayette. Is this the Steve Lehto Chair Club channel where rule number 1 is don't talk about the chair? Oh, that's good. Santiago Garcia Jr. says Ginger is the only one left in the cast. And she's got to be getting up there in age. It was kind of sad. I do feel sorry for her because she was on that show and she committed to it. I mean, she played her right. You know, she played her role. And then later she was apparently so bothered by the fact that I think it typecast her that she would not participate in any of the reunion shows. And it's one of those things where I understand where she's coming from. But years later, I bet she looked back and said, you know something, I kind of wish I had, you know. So Cyberdocs' parachutes are foolproof. No, they're not. In fact, it's interesting. I did a book on the jetpacks, which I mentioned a couple of weeks ago. And they were talking about how dangerous jetpacks were because if you were up there and failed, you would plummet like a rock. And the Army, for instance, has mathematical figures. And they say, no, we can tell you how many parachute jumps are failures and how many people will get hurt. And so they've got the math figured out on it. But my point is that if you go skydiving and your parachute works perfectly, you will often hit the ground still kind of hard and you might fall down. And I've heard of people who went skydiving, landed, fell down, and said, I fell down and I sprained my wrist. I want to sue the skydiving place. And I'm saying, well, did you sign a document before you jumped? Yes. Did you read it? A little. Did you understand that you were jumping out of an airplane from 3,000 feet? Okay. It's called assumption of the risk. So Redneck Coder, what is your opinion of the band We Were Promised Jetpacks? Somebody gave me that CD, at least one of their CDs, and I liked it a lot. I was impressed. And that's the kind of band name where you go, okay, it's a cool band name, but it's probably going to hurt them somewhere down the road. There's a lot of bands out there that are very, very good that don't get as much airplay because they've got strange names. So that's one of them. But we were promised jetpacks. I've got the CD around here somewhere. It was given to me 4 moves ago. I've moved 4 times in the last 6 years. Um, Joe Norsworthy says Marianne was Miss Nevada. I think the producers knew she was the pretty one. Well, I get what you're getting at, but I do think that the producers probably thought that between the two, side by side, especially how they were made up on the show, Marianne looked like the girl next door, and Ginger looked like a movie star, which is what her role was. So, you know, parachute jumps are always successful. It's just the landings aren't always successful, says D. Sailor. And that, of course, is a mathematical proof. It's not the fall that hurts you. It's the sudden stop at the bottom. MHO8 says helium balloons in a lawn chair. Hey, let's not forget about that guy. Hooked up a bunch of helium balloons to a lawn chair and started flying away. And I think did he have a CO2 pistol? But he had something to control how many balloons he had. But his math wasn't terribly good. And I seem to recall that he got up into some controlled airspace near LAX, was it? Someplace. Cold Lake Altus is a band in Toronto called the Ugly Ducklings. They're actually quite good. Good. Yeah, no, it's kind of funny. I'm really into music in the sense that I surf YouTube looking for bands and looking for music. And for instance, there's a band called Thriving Ivory. Thriving Ivory had a song called Angels on the Moon that was a big hit about, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. And I was poking around the other day and I ran across that song. I'm like, I remember that song. I wonder what ever happened to this band. And I looked them up and it turns out they had a bunch of other songs. So I look them up, turns out they got a bunch of others. I like those songs too. And I'm like, how come I don't know this? I know why. It's because I stopped listening to radio 15 years ago because the radio stations were all playing the same thing. So, oh. Wild Bill 57 says Ginger was upset because she was misled. She was told she's going to be a major character, not part of an ensemble cast, never associated with the rest. Yeah, I've seen those stories about that, and I believe it may have been her agent who was pitching her kind of hard to get her on the show because, I mean, the show is called Gilligan's Island, but, 55 Sadell, is it legal for an attorney to practice out of their home? I don't know why it would be illegal. It might not be businesslike. I mean, that's the thing. I know a lot of people who started working out of their homes these days. And if you're going to meet with a client, it's nice to have an office to go sit down and meet with them at. But Matt at War says, I quit listening to radio because of my pillow ads, not attorney spokespersons and tax relief ads. Yeah, the ads can be quite annoying also. William Page, if parachutes are foolproof, why do you wear 2? Well, so there's a 1 in 1,000 chance it'll fail. And so then you go to the second one, there's a 1 in 1,000 chance that one will fail. Your odds are actually pretty good that one of the 2 will work. Oh. Brandon H, is it ever too late to apply to the bar to become a lawyer? I don't think so. There's no age limit. You'd have to do the qualifications for it. And I've mentioned before, there was a woman in my law school class who I believe was in her 70s, but she may have been in her 60s. I'm not sure we ever asked her age. But I've heard of people quite late in life deciding to become a lawyer because it just sounded like fun. D. Wood says, listening to you on the run, and then there's Bailey or Jennifer. I'm assuming you're referring to WKRP. And yeah, I think that I'm a Bailey fan. I dug the glasses. Drew's Outdoors, will Brian Steele's contempt ruling hold on appeal? I don't think so, but I could be wrong. And the reason is we don't know all the facts. That's a video I put up this morning about the attorney who's held in contempt because he wouldn't reveal the source that revealed to him that a judge had done something that appeared to be inappropriate. And I'm purposely saying it that way because we don't actually know what happened. And so if the facts bear out, like I just said, that contempt would not hold. But it is an interesting question. And as I pointed out, all it took was a bailiff or a secretary or a clerk to see the judge, the prosecutor, and a witness go into the chambers and then look out here and see the defense attorney go, okay, that's an issue right there. That's an issue. But we don't know for certain. So it seems to me that the court, and I'm not talking about the court who held this guy in contempt, but a court would need to get to the bottom of this and go, okay, why was there an ex-parte meeting happening? Why wasn't this guy included? And then why would it matter how he found out if he simply found out? And the judge might have an explanation. The judge might say, hey, somebody planted a bug in my office and I can prove it, or something, you know? Kevin Kerr, hello from New Zealand, one of my favorite places on earth that I've never been to. Oh, I got friends in New Zealand and Australia, but I've never been to either, and I'd love to go there. One of these days I will. Not a banned account says, if the U.S. presidential election causes civil unrest, can we invoke Hirabayashi versus the United States against insurrectionists and their known associates? Are you talking about the internment camp case? Because that was an unusual one because they claimed that was because of the war. Many people have said since then that they don't think that's a very good case, and it'd be tough to cite that as quote unquote good law these days, especially if we weren't at war. But I get your point, but I don't know. One thing I would need to tell you, and this is important to understand, is that at the level of the U.S. Supreme Court, most of the cases are being decided almost as a policy issue rather than as a legal issue, because you'll see them contort their reasoning to fit a result, meaning that I want this result. How do I get there? As opposed to what result flows naturally from this. And that's how you can get so many 5-4 opinions. Okay. So 4 opinions are wrong by definition because they're outvoted by 5. And yet 4 U.S. Supreme Court justices who are wrong. How is that possible? And so, like I said, it's more of a policy thing than anything else. Pete Nicholas says, I gave up on broadcast radio a long time ago, got brassed off the dang ads. Same with TV, don't watch it now. Yeah, I mean, I've got a Sirius satellite receiver in one of my vehicles, and I'll listen to that. Although some channels do play ads, but the channels that don't, I like First Wave. I have a 60s channel, 70s channel, and I like listening to those. But the sad part is when you are driving around and you hear like, oh, there's an oldies station in Saginaw, an oldies station in Traverse City, and you go to it and they're playing the same songs every single time. No one, and don't get me wrong, no one needs to hear Brown Eyed Girl on the radio. Okay. Brown Eyed Girl is a great song. I love Van Morrison, but Brown Eyed Girl has been played to death. You don't need to play it anymore. And I've read articles, I've read entire articles, I've read books on radio programming, and they're not trying to play the best music. They're trying to play the least offensive music. And so if they play 10 songs, if this one song here might cause someone to tune out, they go, oh, let's just play these 9 songs. Okay, that means your playlist just got smaller. And so there are some songs out there that some people love and some people hate. And the question is, how much do they hate it? And it's kind of strange, but that's how radio stations are programmed. It's like programming defensively. And it's always bothered me, but I've never gotten to program a station. So for all I know, if I were to program a station right now, no one would listen to it. Oh, Sassy Letty says a band called Muse. Please listen to the song called Uprising. Lyrics are what's happening now. Yeah, I've read some great lyrics lately. We talked about this before. So, William Page, can you read for the law anymore? In some states, you can do other things. And in California, for instance, you can intern to get part of your credit. You still have to pass all the bar exams and things like that. So sort of. I mean, but back when Abraham Lincoln became a lawyer, all he did was go and read a bunch of stuff at the direction of another attorney who then sponsored him to become a lawyer. And he went and appeared before the bar. They questioned him, said, "You're good." And that was it. And, Clarence Darrow went to the University of Michigan for one semester and dropped out and said, "Screw this. I'm going to go do it the other way." And became one of the best known litigators in American history. And I've read books about him. And he was trying cases in a different time when you get up and give a 6-hour closing argument. But there's a great opportunity for someone to make a movie, because one of the most dramatic things that ever happened in a courtroom was with Clarence Darrow. And he was put on trial. Clarence Darrow was, because he was accused of trying to fix a jury in another case of his. And the prosecution they got tired of losing to this guy. And so they were prosecuting him, saying he bribed a juror. And the case looked like they had a pretty strong case against him that he may have bribed a juror. And so he's on trial, in essence, for his life, because if he gets convicted of bribing a juror, he's going down. And he hired the best attorney that money could buy at that time to represent him, because he couldn't hire himself, So he hires the best attorney. And the day before closing arguments, his attorney got sick with something extremely bad, like appendicitis or something, could not come to court. But there's a jury impaneled. Now, he could have asked for a mistrial, but instead, Clarence said, "Can I argue my own case?" The judge said, "Sure, go right ahead." He argued his own case, and the jury found him not guilty. And that is a great story, which I'd never heard before, but I've read several books about him, and it's in there, so it's pretty cool. G Keyman 565 says, "Hey, Steve Lehto, hope everyone's doing great," and we are. Redneck Coder says, "You've Sirius XM. Have you ever tried canceling that?" Believe it or not, I have, not on this vehicle, but previously, and you are correct. You are correct. Working with Sirius XM's cancellation department, it's like working with the AOL cancellation department. We know how bad that was. Mark Miller, what are your thoughts on Jerry Spence? I've read stuff he's written, and I'm familiar with his track record, but I've never actually studied him that closely. So I'm not really sure how good he was, but I know he was renowned as one of the greatest plaintiffs' attorneys around. So Mark Miller says, "I found that musically, local radio stations often play music based on who's coming to town for concerts, especially if they're sponsoring the concert. They might do that. But I've also seen it before where I've been walking out of a concert or handing out bumper stickers for some radio station that I don't like, that does not play the music I just heard. I'm like, why are you here? Why are you here?" So Aaron Freeman says, "I'm offended by inoffensive programming." That's the irony of it, isn't it? Santiago Garcia says, "Play the traveling songs like On the Road Again, Get a Gallon of Gas, and Running on Empty." Yeah, you can do that thematically. So Joe Norsworthy says, "Joe Biden graduated 76th in a class of 85 at Syracuse Law School." I have no idea if that's true. I can tell you that I graduated from a very small class of, I think, 72 or 74 started. Only 36 graduated. And I was above the median line there of the graduates. But I can also tell you that anybody who went to law school and graduated and passed the bar, each of those things is a signpost. It's something you put in your resume, but it actually doesn't matter beyond that. Because like I said, Clarence Darrow dropped out of law school. And if you were around and you were around and you needed a good attorney, you'd hire him. You didn't care where he graduated his class. Matthew Shostrom, "Do you think it should be made nationwide that you only need to pass your state's bar to be made a lawyer?" You mean to practice in other states? No, that's a dangerous concept if I'm understanding your question correctly. See, I don't practice law in Ohio. I'm not licensed to practice there. If I wanted to get licensed to practice there, I'd have to go to get admitted. They might make me take a test or two. But the point is, I would need to know Ohio law. And there are big differences, as I like to say. Laws vary wildly from state to state. And so what happens is I've seen this before. I was on a case once where the people we were suing hired a law firm out of Chicago to handle their case. And so every single time we went someplace, there was the local attorney and the Chicago attorney, but the Chicago attorney was clearly the one driving. clearly the one driving. And I would look at that because there were times where the attorney for Chicago would do something wrong. And I'd be looking at it, and I look at the other attorney, and then finally the other attorney go, excuse me. And then they would fix it. And don't get me wrong, the attorney for Chicago is probably making $1,000 an hour being paid by some big corporate client and also spending time in a good hotel and being flown around the country. But when she goes to another state that she's not licensed to practice law in and she gets sworn in pro hoc vice, there's a good chance she does not understand as much of the nuances of the process as you might see. So there you go. Eli says, weird to see the set from another angle. Yeah, there was a lot of debate among the programmers here at Lehto's Law about whether or not we should do this. And we decided to do this. So, by the way, I'm not sure how much of this stuff anybody even cares about. But normally, I've got this Logitech HD 1080 clip-on camera, and it clips onto the top of my monitor right here. And it bothered me because I'd put it over here, but I keep looking back and forth like this, and I thought it made me look shifty. So I realized that I could have a tripod with the legs collapsed all the way right here. And so right now, the camera is here, and the dialog box is right here. And I think it looks better, but I won't know until I watch this video back a couple days from now. So we'll see. Michael Lawless is 41 states use the uniform bar exam. How does that work with different states' laws? Because most states have a 2-day bar, and the multi-states 1 day, and the second day is essays. So when I was taking the bar exam back in 1991, there was a 2-day exam. 1 day was multi-state, 1 day was essays. So Cyberdoc says, where'd you hide Ben? You can actually see Ben. And let's see if I can do this correctly. It's right there, sticking out on top of that license plate. You can't always see it from this camera. Jay Abate says, a lawyer was defensive when I mentioned AOL email addresses being outdated. That's something that, something, I know people still have them. Don't mind me says, I've got one. But AOL is such a relic of the past in just terms of what it was, that to still have an AOL address, I understand you could, maybe you had it for a million years, whatever. So, but Chris Tope asked about Bailey versus Jennifer. We've already discussed that from WKRP. I'm a Bailey man, but G Keyman 565. I found a nice looking gavel at a flea market. It's here when you need it, when you're a judge. I've actually got a gavel. It's not on the set. It used to be on the set years ago. I was appointed or voted, or I don't know. Somehow I wound up being the chairperson of state laws, consumer law section of the state bar for a year. And they gave me a ceremonial gavel. And the entire panel of the board had like 10 members. Like, what am I going to do? Bang the gavel? So. Santiago says, Steve, on your set, did you have the Titanic? Well, the Titanic is still there also. It's right there behind that mug. It's sinking. It's still sinking. The Titanic bank is always sinking. And people ask me, they go, Steve, where did you get that Titanic bank? And I'm wondering now if you guys know that Google exists or Amazon. If you go to Amazon and type in Titanic bank, that bank will pop up as the first hit. And now it's a couple $100. And I actually bought that with my own money. But yeah, if you want one, boom. Hey, who put that there? Oh, you can't see the microphone, can you? Wow. Microphone is right here. There we go. I guess that's one thing that got changed with the movement of the camera. See, I learned these things. Oh, boy. Michael Lawless, have you ever heard proper Dolby Atmos music? No, I have not. I'm not even sure what that is. I assume you're talking about some kind of treatment to where it's like not just stereo, but it's like all around you or something. I'm just guessing. Cindy Coe, hi, Steve, from Kingston Springs, Tennessee. Dr. Siegel says, I've heard judges who sentence someone to death break the pen they used to sign the paperwork. What other weird traditions do you know of? I've never heard that one. And I can't imagine that's a thing. But then again, I'm in Michigan. We haven't had the death penalty since the 1800s. We were the first state to do away with that. So I've never heard that one. I hear all kinds of urban legends, but you hear all kinds of stuff also. Like if the jury comes back in and they look at the plaintiff won. But if they look at the defendant won. And I've seen the jury come in and half of them look at the plaintiff, half look at the defendant. Like that's not even possible if you guys have got a verdict. So, oh boy. VS, we love you, Steve. Well, I love you too. And by the way, thank you for that because that reminds me, someone else asked, they said, hey, Steve, should I rely upon ChatGPT to give me legal citations? And I wanted to say, before I forgot and got off on another topic, that I had several people send me notes and say, Steve, you understand that you don't even understand what you're talking about because you said that someone should be able to make the program not hallucinate cases. And I said, it seems pretty easy to me because all you'd have to do is say, okay, you gave an answer, right? And they go, yeah, but the thing doesn't know what the answer is. The thing just knows these words are just numbers to them. I said, okay, but couldn't you program it to look for a certain word formation, which is word v word or word vs word, cut that out, and then run that through a search engine for legal stuff? I had a dozen people who refused to admit they were wrong by going, no, that could not be done. You could not train a computer to do that. I go, so I could teach, I'm guessing, a smart third grader to do that. I could teach a smart third grader to look for those. And by the way, because in this context, let's assume that all legal citations have the V or the VS between words. All you got to do is do a search for the letter V by itself or VS by itself, and then ask, is it preceded and followed by words? And then take that and feed it through a search engine that does legal searches. You could not program a computer to do that. Really? Okay. I guess ChatGPT will never replace an attorney then. Oh. Rockhound says, I'm getting seasick. The zoom amount is exaggerating your natural movement. Is anybody else getting seasick? I apologize if I'm moving too much. G. Keyman says, hey, does anybody want an America Online install CD? That was the joke. You'd get install CDs in the mail. You get them in your newspaper. You get them in magazines. You couldn't get away from those things. I mean, the CDs used to install America Online, they were ubiquitous. Prince Albert says, Steve, they haven't even trained all of the lawyers to do that. Well, that's the funny part, is that the lawyers were looking at it going, well, it's such a simple thing. Obviously, they did that. No, they didn't. Bon Gondor says, I watched True Believer, and it was a wonderful movie. Did I mention that movie? It's one of those movies that I think True Believer, and it's got a young Robert Downey Jr. in it, with James Wood. It's a great movie, and it's a lawyer movie, and it's got a couple things in it that I don't quite think are perfectly realistic. And of course, it's got some dramatic courtroom scenes that are probably over the top. But it is, in my mind, one of the better lawyer movies out there. Harvey Weitzman says, hey, Steve Lehto, can you please answer my previous question? It's in regards to violating 18 USC 242. Well, I don't see your question, so I apologize. You'll have to understand there's 570 people in the room, and it does go by pretty quickly, so I apologize. He says, you did in a video a little while back. Okay, I might have. I've always liked that movie. I've seen it many times, and I think it's very, very good. But like I said, some things in the courtroom scenes are a little bit over the top. But MH08, any plans to do another live DJ gig somewhere in the future? Yes. I keep meaning to take steps in that direction, and that is to see if I can become a disc jockey and play music someplace in some town on a real over-the-air radio station. I don't want to do it remotely from here. I want to actually go there and do it live. So, Michael Lawless, do lawyers still, rely on LexisNexis as much, or has Google replaced a lot? It depends on the field of law you're in, because I don't have to look up case law that often. unless a new case comes out, in which case become familiar with it very quickly. But I know guys who do a lot of, like, say, bankruptcy work, who are constantly digging through federal court opinions to try to find stuff to back them up or whatever. And so it depends on the judge, or this depends on the case load that you have and what type of stuff it is. Robin Rack says, I believe I'm being blacklisted. I'm going to confront upper management next week. Do you have any words of wisdom for me? Non-legal advice, but are you talking about an employment situation? The question is, are you being blacklisted for any of the reasons that would actually be actionable? But my advice to you is try to keep as much of anything you can in writing to document it, and to keep your cool, because losing your cool will never help you. So Santiago Garcia says, along with Steve's recommendation of Anatomy of a Murder. I love that movie too. And I understand it's an old movie. Jimmy Stewart, Ben Gazzara, and George C. Scott has one of the greatest moments of all time, ever. It's when George C. Scott asks the woman on the stand about whether she's having an affair, whether she was having an affair with somebody. Great thing. Harvey Weitzman, why don't local governments get in trouble for violating 18 USC 242 deprivation of rights under the color of law, especially when violating 2A? Well, I believe there's a private cause of action for that. So if somebody were to be deprived of their rights under the color of law, they would be allowed to bring their own action, meaning you could file a lawsuit. And so my understanding is, and I don't handle those kinds of lawsuits, but I know guys who do. And when they get good cases, they take them and they bring them. And next thing you know, there's either a victory where they win, they get some money, or they get some, they don't get some money and they lose. Coffee Guy, is the beware of low-flying owls a reference to Russia's fly-by-night? No, but it may as well be now. Growing up in Detroit, we heard Rush all the time on the radio, not just from the Canadian radio stations, but the U.S. stations played it too. Oh, Michael Lawless, do you need any licensing to be a DJ on the air? No, the FCC says you can put anybody on the air, but they still got to follow the rules. In the old days, if the DJ was the only person in the building and had to take meter readings, you would have to be licensed with a thing where you simply sent it in and they sent it back. There's no test, no nothing. It didn't even cost any money, I don't think. I still have the little card. But nowadays, they don't even need to have anybody in the facility. I know radio stations where there's not a single human being in the building. And if the computers crash, they got problems. But yeah, there's no licensing required, but they still got to stick to the rules. But the rules are actually pretty straightforward. Just, don't swear on the air, that kind of thing. Honora Dord, and I could be mispronouncing, I don't know the accents go. Good to see you well, Steve. Hope you have a good day. And to you, my friend. Ad Librator, I know you do lemon law. Is there any other type of case that you would feel like you had to jump on it? It depends. Once in a while, somebody bring me a case that I just think is so egregious, and it looks like I wouldn't mind getting into it. The problem is that when you get really focused on one thing and that's what you do, you can have to sometimes get up to speed to practice something else. So, it depends. Big Bad John says, yeah, Lee Remick. Lee Remick was also in Anatomy of Murder. Oh, yes, she was. Mark Miller enjoyed True Believer as well. Cyberdoc says, a few years ago, I made a video of watching Lehto's Law live in an abandoned power plant. Good times were had. I did not know you did that. I'd be happy to watch that. It'd be very meta for me to watch you watching me do a live. Little rigs I am. Michael Loss, a radio broadcast license used to be needed. I'm not sure that's important anymore. No, not anymore. MH08. Closest I've ever been to a DJ was a dispatcher at a bus company. I did have listeners on scanners. What's funny is I had a case years ago with a company that was they sold concrete, and they had these gigantic trucks that hauled concrete, and one of their truck drivers was a witness in my case, and he came to court, and he one of the deepest voices I'd ever heard. This guy was in the wrong business. He should have gotten into radio or television announcing or something, he had a voice that was like 5 octaves lower than God's. And I heard this guy's voice. I'm like, oh my God. So I was talking not to him, but to his boss. And I said, that guy's got a great voice. And he goes, yeah, he goes, believe it or not, we have people who've called us asking like who he is. Who's that guy with that voice? So it's amazing. Oh boy. Ian, the Ghost Rider, Jeeping Trucker, what's your opinion on carrying cash across state lines to buy a car? It's a dangerous endeavor. You got to be careful. I've mentioned before, I carried cash on me once to try to buy a boat motor. And my first thought was, I'm in trouble if I get pulled over and a cop finds it. He says, yeah, you're involved in some kind of illegal activity. Funny thing is, I do wonder if they would have taken my cash from me, because I'm also carrying identification that shows that I'm a lawyer. And the question then is, if they know I'm a lawyer and I can file lawsuits and not worry about so much of the cost or anything, would they still take my money? But it didn't happen. It was a hypothetical. I love scotch. Says, good job. And I thank you very much for that. The question is, do you love scotch, the drink, or scotch, the tape? Don Jackson, have you seen the movie Gung Ho? Of course I have. Michael Keaton. Are they trying to build cars in Detroit? Yeah, I remember that one. It was pretty funny. You know, it was set in, I believe, a town there. They make automobiles, and Japanese company comes in and takes over. And the question is, you know, can they and their American counterparts get along and build cars? Cyberdoc's going to send me the link. Thank you very much. Small town, says my brother is a retired lawyer. He has a lot of stories for sure. Yeah, and the question always is it a story I saw with my own eyes, a story I heard from somebody I believe, or is it something simply I heard? And, you know, I try to make those distinctions. I've had people accuse me of making up my stories. And I got an email once that started with, Steve, I know you make up all your stories, but once, you know, well, you know, if I tell you it happened, it happened. Okay. And, but occasionally I'll say, well, I heard this story, you know, and I make it very, very clear. So there you go. Zimbo1212, are you a Howard Stern fan? Yes, I am. And I know people who don't like Howard Stern go, what? That guy's filthy. You've got to understand from a radio perspective, people who study radio, Howard Stern was the most successful disc jockey ever. I know he morphed into a talk show host, but what he did in the radio was so groundbreaking. And so many people go, all he did was get on there and crack dirty jokes and you know, bodily function jokes and stuff. And that's not it, because people tried imitating him and couldn't quite do it. And how did he do it so well that only he could do it? It's kind of like people who want to criticize Jackson Pollock. All he did is drizzle paint on canvas. Yeah, you try it and see if you can do that. Oh, I could. No, you couldn't. You couldn't. And so I don't want to argue with anybody about this, but one of the greatest stories of all time, and just think about this. Howard Stern was once fined by the FCC because he claimed that he had a man come into his studio and play the piano with a part of his body that you would not expose in public. And Howard Stern described this, and he used the P word for the man's body part. And he got fined because you could hear the piano going ding, 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 ding. Is that obscene? Chopsticks? Is that obscene? No. Is the P word obscene? No. Is the man unzipping his pants that you can hear but not see obscene? No. None of it's obscene. And somebody complained to the FCC and said it was obscene, and the FCC agreed and they fined him, which proves the point about theater of the mind. Howard Stern had convinced people they had seen something that didn't happen because no man came in and dropped his pants. They made the whole thing up, but they paid the fine because they're like, whoa, look what we did. And by the way, it didn't matter if they made it up or didn't make it up, because the FCC said that what went out over the air was obscene. But what was obscene about it? Because Sally Jesse Raphael, for instance, would have done entire videos, you know, entire shows with the word penis in the title. That word's not obscene. The FCC approved that a long, long time ago. So that's how his mind worked in such a way. So I have to say that. But I know some people go, I don't like him. Did you ever actually listen to him? And by the way, if you listen to him now on Sirius, he's really evolved into like he'll do interviews, long form interviews, where he'll interview like Billy Joel for like an hour and a half or Elton John for an hour. And he couldn't do that on terrestrial radio. And he did not do much of that early in his career, but he does that now. And if you hear an interview that he does, it is as good or better than any interview you see on 60 Minutes or any of those things, because he's so good at interviewing people. And he's not just asking the real nosy, weird questions he used to ask. These are good interviews. They are. Just trust me in that. So Jerry C says the corporate radio monopoly and repetitive track lists destroyed terrestrial radio. I miss the days of King Biscuit and the Flower Hour, Westwood One concert series, Metal Shop, and Freeform Radio. Very sad. Yeah, and there was a time when radio stations you could only own 7, 7, and 7, the 777 rule. 7 FMs, 7 AMs, and 7 TV stations across the country. So if you bought an 8th FM station, you had to sell one. You weren't allowed to own more than 7. So there were, and by the way, at the time, you're also not allowed to own competing stations in the same market. You couldn't own 2 FMs in one market. So that guaranteed on some level a certain amount of competition. And as soon as they removed that rule, corporations came in, Clear Channel and Cumulus, and bought up like 85% of the radio stations in America. And to save money and to pay off the corporate debt, they started syndicating everything and doing the voice tracking. And so now one person can do air shifts at all these different stations in the same market, and the stations all sound alike, and they barely even, compete with each other. And so it's kind of sad. So don't mind me, says I like the old Howard Stern. Well, remember, he not originally, but at one point was on WWWW in Detroit, 106 FM. They changed the country, and he left town, went to D.C. Jay Lee says Steve doesn't make up stories, and he's not about clickbait either. There's enough real weirdness in the world without having to create added fiction. Thank you. By the way, I still get every single day, I'm not making this up, every single day, I get an email that says something to the effect of, Steve, your thumbnails aren't working. Your channel is floundering. I can help you by making better thumbnails for you. Here are some examples of my work. And they show me the thumbnails, which is a typical thumbnail where it's like some guy going, craziest thing ever. And it's bright yellow and exclamation marks and cartoon faces. And I look at that and go, but what's the craziest thing ever? What's it about? And I insist that my titles and my thumbnails will actually tell you what my video is about. Now, does that hurt me on some level? Possibly. But would we be better off having people click on it and go, this isn't the craziest thing ever? Now I'm pissed. So MHOH leave traffic reporters and mispronounce local street names. That's funny. That's funny. Because, in just in Detroit, for instance, there's Gratiot. You might guess Gratiot, even though the first T is pronounced like SH and the second T is pronounced like a T, Gratiot. But then you've got Belle Isle. Right down river is Gross Eel. Belle Isle and Gross Eel. And eel and isle are spelled the same. There's Shaner, which looks like it could be German for Schoenherr, but it's Shaner. And those kinds of things really show you if somebody is local and how well they know their stuff. And when people mispronounce names, place names, ooh, that hurts. That hurts. Trish Norman, I remember the King Biscuit Flower Hour. Yeah, I believe that was syndicated by Westwood One, which the previous commenter had said. And I'm not sure if I ever told this story, but when I was in law school, a friend of mine came into class and Steve, there's a posting on the board outside for internships you might want to take a look at. And I go, what's that? He goes, let's go look. So I go out and read it, and it goes, Westwood One, legal department looking for interns with a name and number. So I called the guy, go send over a resume. I sent over a resume. The guy called me in for an interview. I forgot the guy's name, but I interviewed with the lead attorney, the guy who was the legal department of Westwood One, and had a great talk with him. I believe he had a connection to my law school. And but they were in the same building as Pirate Radio with Scott Shannon. Because at that time, Westwood One was owned by the same parent company. And so I got to see their air studio. I got to see all this cool stuff. And at that time, for instance, Westwood One was doing a lot of concerts. And they were about to do a live concert from South America of Billy Idol. And I forgot if it was like Rio or someplace, but he was playing some gigantic festival. And it's going to be broadcast on 150 stations in the U.S. who had signed up to syndicate it from Westwood One. And he said, a lot of the work we do is contract work like that. And I talked to the guy, but I wound up not going to work for him because I got offered an internship here in Michigan, which is what I wound up doing. But the funny part is that I did actually get a tour of the Westwood One facilities. Very, very cool. Gary Weisenberger says, yes, it's Lasher and Lasser. And the name is Lasser, Lahser. People will often mispronounce it as Lasher and occasionally spell it as Lasher because the HS is a very unusual formation of letters in the English language. But it was a guy's name. I actually looked it up a while back. It's a guy's name. And Lasser is one of the major north-south routes in Oakland County, just north of Detroit. Not sure how far down it goes. Does it end in Southfield or does it continue on into Detroit where it ends? I think it's in Detroit. Scott Summers asked about Dr. Demento. And of course, Dr. Demento is legendary. And I've always liked him. He played a lot of strange stuff, but that was his thing. We're going to play some really strange stuff. Oh. Jay Abbott says, AKA, you ain't from these parts. Yeah. Roadkill Ron says, my friend owns a radio station to this day. The amount of weed we smoked in that studio is epic. I remember walking into radio stations back in the 70s. I'm sorry. The first time I set foot in a radio station was 1980. So in the 80s. And people smoked everywhere back then. And none of this smoking section, non-smoking. The whole world was a smoking section. And a lot of DJs, for whatever reason, smoked. And you'd go into a radio station, and there'd be ashtrays everywhere. And you walk into the studio, and the DJ's smoking. There's a huge haze in there. And, of course, there's sound deadener on the walls, which absorbs the smoke. And it was one of those things, if you're a non-smoker, you didn't enjoy it. Rockhound51 says, mind me, is the slow mode on or just for me? Well, it's slow in the sense that you can only comment once a minute. And the reason I said it that way is there are right now 555 people in the room. Hey, check it out, the 555 building in Birmingham. No, 555 people in the room. And it gets out of control if I don't put flood control on, because people will actually type the same question and just go enter, 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 enter. And before you know it, it's just worthless. And so I like to be able to read it as it goes by. And I can still do that when there's I've had up to 900 people in the room at one time. So Cyberdox's tar and nicotine stains covered the studio and it stinks. Yes, exactly. And Robin O'Connell says Dr. Demento made Weird Al Yankovic a star. I believe, and I know at least the story is, that he had recorded Another One Rides the Bus on a cassette tape with an accordion and sent it in to Dr. Demento, who played it. And I don't think he had a record contract. I don't think he had anything at that time. Now, it's true. I could be getting it completely wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's true. And I can also tell you that the Bare Naked Ladies, I think, were busking in Toronto or something. And they had the song, If I Had $1 Million. And they had that song, and they thought it was good enough, so they recorded a tape of it and sent it to somebody who wanted to play it. And they go, well, you need to send in the actual CD or something we can get off of it. And like, all we got's that tape. So that happens too. Yeah, Colin Sevier confirms he gave Weird Al his stars. Ron Valley. Hi, Steve from Northern Illinois with sunny, awesome blue sky weather. I've got overcast and 65 degrees. It's dropped 20 degrees since yesterday. Carl Pillis is KMET in Los Angeles for the Surf Report. KMAT for a long time was a well-known rocker, as they say out there. Blah, blah, blah. Thank you for checking, my friend. He says, I made it. They gave me early release today. I assume that they're going to expect you to check back in, what, dusk? Oh, boy. AJ Stone, howdy, folks. What did I miss? It's hard to say. Richard Cranium says, good afternoon from the Western UP. Ironwood area? Iron Mountain? Iron River? Taco Cat confirms Dr. Demento is probably the first to play a Weird Al song. And I believe that is true. Robin O'Connell says it was my Bologna to my Sharona. I thought it was another one rides the bus. I could be wrong. Ryan Blackhawks is weird. Our temp is the same, but that's just a usual June for us. The weather here lately has been all over the place. So, Mrs. Hayes checking in from the Jersey Shore. Primal Rage finally caught you on live. I know I'm late, but I'm here. That'll work. But 2:18 says my big clock over there. You know, I should move my big clock and put it right back here and make it look like a real radio station. Rockhound 51, Steve is gold. Thanks for the timing explanation. Hard words. Sarah Callahan, Commerce Township is 63, overcast, but 61% humidity. Is Richard Cranium trying to write Baraga? And you misspelled it as Bagara? Baraga, I'm assuming, is what you're talking about there, which is just east of Alston and Nisula, where all of my mother's side of the family are in a cemetery there at St. Luke's. No, St. Henry's. St. Henry's. What am I saying? St. Henry's Church at the corner of Kivadunta Road and the highway. I always forget that 28 or 41. But of course, I went through Baraga twice last weekend on my way up and way back from the Calumet area. Gia Bates says it was my Bologna per the movie, but I prefer another one rides the bus. I thought it was. I'll have to look that up now. I'm starting to doubt my own memory. Hugh Rayleigh says 50,000 watt station in Mexico gave us Wolfman Jack. Yeah, Wolfman Jack was famous as being on one of those stations late at night with that great voice of his. And then, of course, he was made doubly famous by getting to be in the movie American Graffiti. And the makers of that movie were very kind and left him in the soundtrack specifically so he would get royalties. And I read his autobiography years later, and he's talking about that. And he said that one act of generosity basically saved his life, because there was a period of time where he was down on his luck, but that money kept coming in and got him going again. So where in the world is Johnny Knoxville? Good question, Cyberdoc. I don't know. Dan Meinhard says it's chilly in the thumb. Cannot pull in most Detroit stations. Dr. Demento was great. WRIF's parody of Birth Control to Mayor Young for David Bowie's hit was classic. Okay. Well, I lived in Bad Axe for a year and a half. And remember, I'd get in my car and drive around, and I'd often punch the buttons hoping to pick them up. Occasionally, I could pick up WJLB, and the electrifying mojo was on. And that was always a good time. But if you don't know about him, I'm not going to bother trying to explain it. Harvey Weitzman, as an attorney, are you ever invited onto radio these days? I get asked to do interviews periodically, but it's usually it's a toss-up. It can be about things that I've written books about. I'll get asked about the Tucker or the Turbine car or whatever. And then occasionally I do get asked questions about stories I've done in the news. It's been a little while since I've had one of those. But remember when I did a story a long time ago about a woman who was in a car accident, a multi-car pileup on 96 outside of Detroit. And a towing company came and got her car, and it was like a $5,000 towing bill, something crazy. And it made the news, and I did a story about it. And one of the reporters from that station called me up and said, do you want to be in one of the follow-up pieces we do? And I said, I'd love to. So I was on TV explaining it from a legal viewpoint, and I told the guy, I go, dude, anytime you do a story, it mentions cars, traffic tickets, the police, or consumer issues, call me. He goes, I will. And he never did. So I might not have been as good as I thought I was. Mark Miller, is the name Bad Axe a faux pas? No, it actually is a historical name that goes back to one of the earliest settlers there. Was cruising through the Thumb area, and there appeared to be a trail that kind of split in a couple different directions. But there's a campfire there, and he made a comment and said, there's a campfire here, not much else, but we found a bad axe. And he meant to say that they found the remains of an axe that had been damaged, and Bad Axe stuck, And so it's one of those things where I think they toyed with the idea a couple of times of changing the name. It's almost impossible. I posted a thing on my Facebook page the other day about where I stopped to take my picture next to a sign that says Slap Neck Road. And there's a place in Michigan called Slapneck. Now, there's not much there anymore, but there's a town that used to be there, Slapneck Road, Slapneck River. And I looked it up when I first saw it a couple years ago, and it turns out it's a guy's name was Slapnick. But everyone said Slapneck. So by the time they got to putting up signs, the signs say Slapneck. So names can evolve like that also. AKY115 back with another question. Housing affordability. Do you believe corporations should be banned from buying single-family homes? If not, why? Miss Michigan will now give her answer. No, here's the problem. I understand that there are some economic pressures that are caused by corporations buying up homes. And I tend to look at that and go, that's not good for the economy, because as they buy up these homes, it creates fewer homes available. And supply and demand then would dictate that the cost that you can rent these homes out at goes up, but also the number of homes in the market drops, raising the price of the ones that are left. So I get that. I know it was a big thing that happened after the crash of 2008, where huge corporations are buying up homes and turning them into rentals. And it was doing that. But the problem, of course, is that you can't just outlaw things because they're unkind to certain portions of the economy, because contract law and my ability to buy or sell something is something that is guaranteed me in the Constitution. You and I enter into a contract. As long as it's a legal contract, you can't outlaw that contract. Now, you might say, but Steve, is there anything at all that could be considered to be done here? The bigger problem I have is underlying this, and that is the fact that corporations are treated as people. And there was a Supreme Court opinion that goes way back that said that corporations are people. They get all the rights that people do. Well, they can't vote, but they get all the other rights. So why are corporations people now? Well, it was due to a misinterpretation of the 14th Amendment. And most scholars now will say that the Supreme Court ruling that way made a mistake. But it happened so long ago, and our culture's evolved to the point where we are now, that we're not going to undo that. And so you can no more tell a corporation that it can't buy homes than you can tell a person they can't buy homes. So it's a weird situation, but I'm aware of it. But I'm not sure there's much of a fix there other than to look at whether or not corporations are people and should be treated as people. Somebody mentioned Martha Jean the Queen, Gary Weisenberger. Martha Jean the Queen was famous, a host in WJLB back in the day. And she was very, very well known and beloved. People loved her. And my good friend Dick Kernan from Specs Howard School of Broadcast Arts in Southfield, who passed away a couple years ago, one time wrote an opinion piece that got published, or maybe he got quoted in a piece, where he said, well, Martha Jean is good, she's beloved, but quite frankly, she does not belong on WJLB anymore, because the station had started shifting over towards playing more music and being an R&B station. And Martha Jean was more of a talk show host, but her appeal was the wrong demographic. And Dick Kernan said, Steve, he goes, I was quoted in the paper. He goes, I was flooded, inundated with phone calls of the most polite protesters you ever heard. And normally, if you are in the paper and you take a controversial stance, you will get hate phone calls. And he said he was getting these phone calls from people going, is this Mr. Kernan? Yes, I read your quote in the paper today about Martha Jean the Queen, and you don't believe that she meets the demographics of the radio station anymore. I wanted to let you know that I disagree with you. And Dick would say, okay, and they'd say, thank you, and they would hang up. And I mean, he was telling me that story 20 or 30 years later and just raving about how polite her audience was, even the ones who disagreed with him. So, don't mind me clarifies. I see an article saying Dr. Demento played songs like My Bologna, and it was Another One Rides the Bus that got him dozens of affiliates. So it may have been that was a big one for him as opposed to Weird Al. But Bruce J., as a chief engineer of a radio station in the 70s, I can confirm the smoking. I didn't smoke, but in addition to the smoke, we get into all the equipment. Our revenge was the jokes we played in the DJs. Oh, I remember talking to engineers about how they had to clean the insides of the mixing consoles because a potentiometer, or a pot as we called it, you'd turn this dial around, and I'm assuming there's something in there that would contact something else. And if too much smoke got in there, I'm guessing it would cause it to get dirty and it would mess that up. And so I remember in later years being in radio stations where there was a sign going, no smoking in the studio. And so the guys would step into the lounge right next door and smoke up, like a chimney out there. So Joe Bonchi says, Steve, WNBC radio lineup in the 80s, Don Imus, Soupy Sales, Howard Stern, Wolfman Jack. People forget that Soupy Sales had a Detroit connection. And he was an interesting character. Soupy Sales also. So Earthbound Misfits is a friend of mine, almost got the local radio station's license revoked. I'd be curious about that. You don't often hear about licenses of radio stations being revoked because they're worth so much money. You'll often hear about stations being fined and being fined a lot of money. But, Stefan Darmanin says, hi, Steve. I discovered your channel this year, although I also seldom comment. I love your videos and jokes you make. Even if the laws might not be useful for me, as I am from Europe. You make it interesting. I'm curious to know where in Europe you are. Europe is a fairly large place. Curious. D. Michael, AFOSF, and the O has a line through it, like they do some places. Art Bell. Yeah, Art Bell is another classic. The Prodigal Stranger, whatever happened to Grease Man? I don't know. Josiah Hanna, Steve, thanks for filming the Douglas Houghton Falls. I'm going to see it again before it gets developed. There's a big question about that because it was on private property and the state bought it. The state says we're going to turn it into a park. There's a very small sign up by the road right now. I'm talking about the Douglas Houghton Falls up near Lorium and Calumet and Lake Linden in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And I shot a video that I posted on my Vault channel about walking out to the falls. And there's a walking path, very, very easy to follow walking path out. And it takes you to the top of the falls. And then here's the problem. If you lean over, it's a drop about 100 feet down. And people have died out there by leaning over and falling. So I got some grief from people who said, Steve, you said not to do it, then you went and did it. No. I put my camera on the end of a 4-foot-long selfie stick and held it like this. And I was back from the edge. I was nowhere near the edge. I was not going to die for that. But people have pointed out and they said, Steve, the problem is that when the state park gets involved, they're probably going to put in like a path of boards so you don't have to step on the dirt. Then they're probably going to put in a viewing platform. And then they're probably going to put up all kinds of rails around it. And then there's going to be all kinds of signage to explain what you can do, what you can't do, what you should do, what you should not do, where you are, what's going on there. And then by the time you're done, I don't know, a gift center. And there is something neat about seeing it right now because it's just a path and the waterfalls. There's no development. There's a couple markers where somebody's taken a can of spray paint and marked on the trees to indicate which way the trail goes. But you can now follow the trail because the trail is worn into the dirt. You don't need to even follow that at all. And so it's an amazing thing to see. It's the tallest waterfall in Michigan. It's not as grand as the Tequamanon Falls or something, but it's the tallest waterfalls in Michigan. And they're very, very cool to look at. So there you go. Mexican Specs says, hello, Mr. Lehto. Zimbo 1212. Any other cars you'd like to plan to own in the future? I'm working on that right now because I have a potential. I've space for one more car. I just don't know what it would be. Oh boy. AKY115 says, I know you don't talk about politics much. Let's pretend Joe Biden was a family member of yours. Would you be concerned about his cognitive performance after the debate? Putting politics aside, I wouldn't care about his performance in the debate. If he's a family member, I'd care about his performance when he's talking to me face to face. So, I've known people who've had big drops in cognitive performance, shall we say. And I'm talking about literally people I've known face to face. And so that's how I'd make that decision. But it's hard to discuss it otherwise without getting political, which I hate to do. But I appreciate the question. Mark Miller, would it be a Mopar? It doesn't have to be. I'd consider a non-Mopar. There's a few things I really like. I'd love to get a flat fendered or an old Jeep that I could take out and bounce around off road a little bit. I used to have a army truck. It'd be fun to have another one of those, but I'm not sure. That takes up more space than a single car. So, Stefan Darman says, I'm from Malta. Are you really? Wow, that's cool. I don't think I've ever met anybody from Malta before. Malta, of course, is a big old island out there in the Mediterranean. And I believe that the adjective we'd give for them would be Maltese. And so you have like a Maltese Falcon or Maltese Cross. Very, very cool. Thank you for checking in. I appreciate that. I'm blown away by the fact that people actually can check into this show or any show via the internet, and we can, have an interchange like this. Lewis Browning, a deuce and a half. I did have a deuce and a half, the M35A2. I'm not sure if I want another one, though. There's a few other things I'd like to have. PD Squirrel Chaser says Ford GT. My dear friend Mark Lieberman, who is the nostalgic motoring plate that's on my wall behind me, has a Ford GT. I saw it Friday, and it's got 13 miles or 14 miles on it. It's a cool car. I have not driven it yet, though, so one of these days I will. InGen Fair says car can handle off the road. You might not anymore. Well, you got to know what your limitations are. I wouldn't go bouncing down any place where I might roll it or something, but we'll see what happens. Victor Jason. Hi, Steve. Hi, Victor. Cyberdox is 1947 Willis Jeep. And the kind of funny thing is that right now, my friend Mark has in his shop that he's working on an old F-script Ford Jeep that is so cool. It is so cool. But it's the kind of thing that belongs in a museum. I don't want to be out there beating on anything out in the woods. Steve Callagher, what do you think of the 1970s International Harvester Scout four-wheel drive? Those are cool. My family had a couple International Scout Travelwalls, and I've known people who had international pickup trucks and Scouts. I love the Scouts. They are so cool. They are so cool. Carl Pillen, does anyone remember KROQ Rock of the 80s, DJ the Poor Man? Of course. But I remember better Jed the Fish and Mark and Brian are, of course, the other guys over at the other station. And I was thinking about all the different station stickers I've got back here. I've got a Mark and Brian sticker right here. And, of course, these are all people who are on the air at the same time in Los Angeles. I spent a lot of time listening to KROQ Los Angeles, KLOS, and a couple of other stations when I was going to law school out there. The Poor Man did evenings on KROQ, and KROQ was programmed by a guy named Rick Carroll. And it's a really interesting story because occasionally he would make some very strange choices. And so, for instance, like Richard Blade talks in his book about how he got the job at KROQ Los Angeles. And the Poor Man, my understanding was that he had simply met Rick Carroll and they got to talking. And Rick Carroll thought, hey, this guy's an interesting guy. I'm going to turn him into a DJ, and puts him on the radio. And it winds up being that he was co-host of Love Lines with Dr. Drew, but somehow he didn't manage to hang on to the rights to it. So later on, when it got like syndicated and stuff, he kind of got left behind. So, but yeah, I remember the Poor Man. But my favorite was Jed the Fish. Jed the Fish, the afternoon drive guy. He's one of those guys, I can't describe it. I can't imitate it. I can only tell you that he had a distinctive style of speaking. If you heard him talking right now, you go, oh, it's Jed the Fish. It was not imitatable. It was inimitable. He was clever and he was funny as the afternoon drive guy. And I love Jed the Fish, but of course I know who the Poor Man was as well. Brian W. own a boat? No, I do not. I mean, I've got a canoe, but I don't spend as much time in that as I like, and I don't have the time to get a boat. And I've had friends who had boats, and I spent time on theirs and got it out of my system. So, David Martinez, I love your video of the police chase with the riding lawnmower. Police did not want to catch the lawnmower. That's one of those things. Why do they, why would they break off that chase? It's not like they couldn't catch the guy, But I think they just said, "Hey, we know where the guy lives. We'll get him." So, AKY 115. I have a 2014 GT 500 with 800 wheel horsepower. If you're ever in Texas, let me know. Would be honored to take you for a spin and let you drive. That sounds like fun. I had several people ask which car I drove to the UP last weekend. I did not take any of my nice cars because I was concerned about the weather. I drove my Explorer, my 2019 Ford Explorer, as exciting as that is. But I did get my Cobra out over the week. Was it Wednesday or Thursday night? There's an ice cream place near my residence that I go to from time to time. And I always take that picture of that's a strawberry sundae, my friends. A strawberry sundae and the Cobra. And hey, any excuse to go out and drive around. Oh, Jerry C, get a motorcycle, one of those sidecars. I can see the woodchuck riding in the sidecar. That'd be awesome. I got a friend whose mother has got some motorcycles, including one with a sidecar. And I've driven a motorcycle. I've ridden on a motorcycle. I've never had an urge to own one. Nothing against them. I just never have. But I'll tell you right now, I rode a I rode a mini bike not too long ago. I'm like, I could get into having a mini bike again. Those are kind of fun. Oh, Prodigal Stranger. Remember Don Kirshner's rock concert? Yeah, that was the thing. I remember in the midnight special, there's all these shows that used to have bands on performing on TV late at night and the weekends. And some of them could be quite fun. I seem to recall seeing Brownsville Station doing Smoking in the Boys Room on there and seeing the guy playing one of those clear guitars. I'm having a mental blank. The guitar players in the audience can tell me about this. Um, I forgot the name of the guitar. My brother had one. Jake Lyon, I'm about to buy a used mini bike off Facebook's site unseen. Does any limit law apply in the state of Wisconsin? Well, generally speaking, you're buying it from an individual and it's used. Many states allow those sales to be as is, meaning that pretty much you buy what you get. The good news is what's going on with a mini bike is you got two tires, engine, chain, possibly a brake, but it's all exposed and you check it out pretty easily. If it runs, it runs. You're good to go. Somebody asked you to take up 2 parking spaces. No, never. And the funny thing is that the parking space I'm in is a really weird spot where they have a bunch of these diagonal spots, and then there is spots that go up against the curb this way. And so between the last spot of those and this line is this gigantic space, and people do park there. And so I simply parked that one space. If you were to look at the picture again, which you can't because I'm not going to put it back up, but one line is diagonal and one line is straight. The lines are not parallel, but I am between them. So there you go. Cyberdoc Synth X guitar. Alan Holdsworth played one of those. No. It's one of these things. The second I sign up and remember the name, it's just a traditional guitar-shaped guitar that came out in the 60s, I'm guessing, maybe 70s. But the body is plexiglass and you can see right through it. So Wojciech Gabrish says police and mobile operators warrants Europe, US. I'm not sure if it's a question or not. You're simply making a comment or just throwing some random ideas out there. I am very curious to know what happens if you've got warrants in one country in Europe and you can travel so freely among countries. Do you like just discover like, oh, I've got outstanding warrants in Poland. I just can't go back to Poland now. Oh boy, solid gold in American Bandstand, Santiago Garcia. Lewis Browning, I missed the Verner's plant. That was downtown, right? That was kind of downtown, but across. Is it across 75? I never got the Verner's tour. I remember hearing about the Verner's tour. Oh boy. You're gonna make me look this up. Hang on a second. I'll recognize the name as soon as I see it. Dan Armstrong? I don't think that's what I was thinking of, though. But I see a Dan Armstrong, but that looks like it. Ampeg made one. It may have been a Dan Armstrong. It was a person's name, but I could be wrong. Rockhound 51, a hovercraft build? Just things you can build or what? My brother actually built a hovercraft. He got the designs out of Popular Mechanics or Popular Science from back in the day, but it didn't go real well, but he built one just to prove that it could be done, and it was one that you basically steer by leaning, and I remember seeing him put his daughter in it, make her drive it around the yard. Louis Browning, the Verner's tour was epic. Wojciech Gabrish, I apologize, to obtain logs from base stations to track Killa. I apologize. I'm not understanding your question. And I'm not messing with you. I simply don't understand it. Henry Nissanen says, tuning in late today, I imagine dirt bikes on trails are more exciting in Michigan compared to regular on-road riding. You mean dirt mountain bikes or dirt road bike or dirt motorcycles? Yeah, I've never actually ridden a dirt bike like that on trails. I've ridden a mountain bike on trails, but it's a whole different thing, I suspect. Indian Fair says most European countries recognize each other's arrest warrants primarily through the mechanisms of the European Arrest Warrant EAW system, which sounds about right. Drag Pack Mercs is my hovercraft is full of eels. Why do I think it's a Monty Python thing? It's got to be. Bruce Chase has pulled the DJ stunt. DJ's alone at 3 a.m. I snuck in the back door to the basement, reached up through the cable hole under the console, and grabbed his ankle. Folks listening heard quite a scream. That's pretty good. Oh, boy. Wojciech Gabrish says, we have a hit and run where the driver dragged a person under the car for a mile. Why the police cannot find him? I don't know. It depends on where it took place and where the cameras and so on. Santiago Garcia Jr. says, what's the best way to get you a story? Email me at steve@lehtoslaw.com, LEHTOSLAW, Lehto Slaw or Lehto's Law, but Steve at. Brian W., spam, 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 and spam. Hugh Riley, Popular Mechanics was so good. I designed my GeoHeat AC unit on a design from the magazine in the 70s. You know what's even more fun? Find a Popular Mechanic or Popular Science or those kinds of, there used to be a dozen of them from like the 40s. And look at what they're claiming. Like they just invented this. It'll be everywhere. It's an ironing board you can put in your car. It's a washing machine for the trunk of your car. Like, what? Emmanuel Guerrero, why 10 a.m. on the weekends, not 9 a.m. like the week? You must be in a different time zone because I tend to do 10 a.m. Eastern time, Monday through Saturday, and 11 a.m. on Sunday. I've discovered I put up videos at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, my time. They don't do as well as they do as if I put them up at 11 o'clock. I think so many of my audience is in church, you know? Dave Beaver, whatever happened to the car dealership hacking? Did they pay the ransom? I don't know. They claimed that they weren't going to be able to solve it till this weekend, regardless. And I got contacted by somebody who said, Steve, I'm a mechanic and I can't work because the system controls our entire system of paperwork for mechanics. And we used to think like, oh, a mechanic would just go over and do some work, come over and fill out some paper. No, it's all on computers now. And it's all handled by that one program. Prawn Star says, good day, Steve from Jamaica. Well, thank you for checking in, my friend. Kiwi on a bike says, hi, Steve from New Zealand. Listen to your channel while at work. Always entertaining. Thanks. Well, I appreciate that. You are, I believe, the second person to check in from New Zealand today. Maybe you know each other. That's a big place. MH08, Python language uses a lot of spam references. M3 says last try. The tune Classical Gas was performed by Mason Williams on an acrylic guitar. I will now leave you alone. But wasn't that acoustic? Because I'm talking about an acrylic electric, but I understand that you're pointing that out. That's cool. Thank you very much. KD2RDH Larry says Fireball Tool on YouTube does builds out of old magazines. That'd be cool. I'm not familiar with it, but it doesn't surprise me. I love when people do interesting stuff that, puts a lot of work in their videos. Johnny Quest says the Cobra only gets driven at the local ice cream shop on Wednesdays. Actually, it just depends on the weather. It depends on the weather. I was going to take it for a drive today, but it's only 66 degrees outside. And it gets cold in an open top car driving around in Michigan on a cold day. So Buck Rogers is always a joy to listen to your feeds and live shows. You are fun. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Coincidence Theorist says, no, get Science and Invention magazine from the pre-1930s. That's another one. The reason I remember that is that when I was writing my book about jetpacks, I tried to trace the story of the concept of the jetpack back to its beginning. And there was a magazine that published science fiction stories that had a picture on the cover of a guy wearing a jetpack entitled Skylark of Space. And we believe that's the first ever image of somebody wearing what would be called a jetpack. And later on, of course, it evolved, and then they started building jetpacks in the 50s and 60s. But I bought a bunch of these old magazines trying to track that down. And I got sidetracked flipping through these issues going, oh, check this out. It's a dishwasher that you attach to the front bumper of your car. Lucky Leprechaun are both the Cobra and Viper painted Cunningham blue. The Viper is painted red, and the Cobra is actually Viper blue. I kid you not. So there's a couple different blues that Cobras are available in. One they call Guardsman blue. I wouldn't be surprised if Cunningham blue is another one. But I actually had them get the blue that was available on the Viper GTS, and I had them paint it in that color custom. So mine is the only one that's that exact shade of blue that I know of. So DePaul says, yeah, Buick Skylark. No, the Skylark of the Sky was a superhero, I believe, or some fighting crime or fighting something, Tank O Military says your channel is good listen while pulling weeds and mowing the yard. Okay. And what's funny is I have a lot of people tell me they listen to me, listen to me while they're doing other stuff, and then I think to myself, well, I've got podcasts. I realize nobody listens to podcasts. People listen to YouTube. Brian W. and somebody else asked about the erector sets. I didn't have an erector set, but I think my brothers might have. And then there's the Lincoln Log set. And I remember playing with those. I didn't have one, no. But I remember that there were friends of mine who had them. And so I remember those as well. Bubba Cleveland says, I think I met you once at the Macomb County Courthouse. I was a social worker. We were there for different stuff. We had questions about when does court even start. It's been a while since I've been in the Macomb County Courthouse. I've handled cases in Macomb County, but they haven't ended up in the courthouse, strangely enough. But I wouldn't be surprised. Ryan Baker says, we're listening in the pool. Just don't drop anything electronic in the pool. Tom Tuttle says Skylark of Space was a sci-fi story written by E.E. Doc Smith in the 1920s. That could be. You'd have to trust me on this. There's an iPad on my table right there, and the screensaver on my iPad is that image of the Skylark of Space flying. He has a little thing in his hand that looks almost like one of those game show clickers that's controlling him flying, but his hands are free, which is, of course, the tricky part. So Josh says, I listen to YouTube all the time. So do I. I listen to music on YouTube quite a bit. So Matt McDonald says, sorry, Steve, my phone lost signal. I don't know if you answered my question about the auditor, Carolina. No, I didn't, and I didn't see your question. Tigerman99515 says, I missed J.C. Whitney for cool and odd car parts. Oh, yeah. J.C. Whitney where you can buy more junk for your car. You want one of those Auga horns. You want something to hang from your mirror. Oh, they've got like a whole chapter of those. You want something that sits in the back space underneath your rear window. They got tons of stuff for that. J.C. Whitney was amazing, the stuff they had. Hugh Rayleigh, do you still have your jet engine car? I do not have a jet engine car. I have a model of one on my shelf behind me, referring to the turbine car. AJ Stone says, I knew a Tom Tuttle. Back in the day, he taught high school science classes. See, this is what's fun is I missed the question. I have no idea what people are talking about. As long as you're referring to Captain Tuttle from MASH, because he was a good man. He's my best friend. Alfred Wynn asks, how is civil asset forfeiture legal when in both the 5th and 14th Amendments, they state that no one shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process? And that's the question that nobody understands. And I've been saying this since day one, that it doesn't make any sense. But the problem is that civil asset forfeiture goes back to, again, time immemorial, meaning that it existed before the Constitution even existed. There are civil asset forfeiture cases that go back that far. And the theory was that you weren't suing a person, you were suing the thing. And the thing doesn't have rights. And to me, that's the kind of mental exercise that nobody actually believes. And so I think that with enough people being outraged by it, eventually we can do something about it. But it does not make sense. And I think more and more courts are starting to say that. And they're going, look, we're bound by precedent, but this is wrong. So it will take the U.S. Supreme Court to step in and say, you know something? 300 years of jurisprudence, be damned. We're going to go ahead and take care of this. So Stephen Graffam, who's got both PH and F's in his name. Good afternoon, Steve. Good afternoon, Stephen. Scott Summers loved the General Lee's horn. Geary Rexwork. Hey, Steve, I'm glad you're enjoying the Radio Days book by Mike Olszewski. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly because I don't know much about the Cleveland radio market other than what I'm learning in that book, but Geary sent it me. Thank you very much. I'm about to finish the second of the two books. He sent me Radio Days and is Radio Times, the second book. But it's the history of radio in Cleveland. And it's fascinating, even though I don't know anything about Cleveland's radio. And it's the same as I'm familiar with Detroit radio, and there's all these parallels there. So I'm absolutely enjoying. Thank you very much for sending it. I appreciate it. So Lewis Browning says donate to the IJ.org. And I would urge you to do that, or at least follow them, because they're one of the organizations that's fighting to get rid of civil asset forfeiture and qualified immunity. And right there, they're doing the Lord's work in either case, but they're doing both. So Ron Valley says J.C. Whitney's used to be called Warshawskis. I didn't know that. Doesn't surprise me. I've learned that all of these names, Bartles and James, are usually made up. Bob Loblos is not this, SCOTUS. You'd be surprised because there was that recent opinion where they addressed something similar, and it sounded like they were hinting that they might want to take a look at it. And this is one thing that a lot of people assume that if you had to pick, it would take the liberals on the court to throw it out. But I can picture conservatives going, but it's a problem that you just take someone's money from them. I mean, I don't think that's left or right. I can actually see a court looking at this going, it's not left or right. But, so I don't know. I don't know. Joel Kirschman says, but courts are bound by the law before precedent, right? Well, but the law as interpreted becomes precedent. And so, it's a fine line. But recently, our Supreme Court has shown an inclination to overturn cases if they think that the cases were wrongly decided. So there you go. Josh, at what point does flipping the bird qualify as road rage? Oh, I don't think that qualifies as road rage. I think road rage is where you escalate it beyond that, because someone flips the bird at you and you just ignore it or you flip it back. Boom. Game over. If someone takes it one more step, like starts chasing you or something. Oh. Robert Peralta says, was the guitar Dan Armstrong Ampeg? I believe that's what it was, Dan Armstrong. I had something else stuck in my head. I'm not sure why, but Dan Armstrong rings a bell. DePaul says WMMS, Howard Stern's station in Cleveland. I believe he's on WNCX, and he was not on MMS, at least not for a while. At least in the period covered in the book, he wasn't. So, home of the Buzzer, WMMS 101 FM, Cleveland, Perishable Goods 13. Admiral Adama says, but the problem is that the political and financial incentives aren't there. If we get rid of civil asset forfeiture, taxes will have to be raised to make up for it. But here's the thing. Taxes being raised or lowered is an issue for Congress. The Supreme Court presumably doesn't take into account, well, we'd strike this law down, but we make money from it. They're not supposed to. So there's hope. There's hope. Tiger Stripes says flipping the bird can get you shot these days. I only do it under the dash. And I have to tell you a story. I got a note yesterday from somebody who claimed to be a retired police officer. And he said, Steve, I watched the video you did recently where you told people to go ahead and flip off the cops. And you were encouraging them to flip off the cops. And I don't think you should be doing that. I think you should take your video down and put up a video saying, please don't flip off the cops because the cops will shoot you. And I'm a former cop and I know that. And I wrote the guy back and said, number one, I never told people that you should do it. In fact, I said specifically, you can do it, but I don't recommend it. But number two, are you telling me the cops are allowed to shoot people who flip them off? So I've decided that at least for a while, I am not going to be doing any videos on my Vault channel where I complain about emails because I'm convinced some of these people are setting me up. There's no possible way that the guy is saying, Steve, put up a video that says, don't flip off cops because they're allowed to shoot you. But that's what he said. So Josh says it's definitely the Ampeg. Well, you don't know definitely what's in my head. But there you go. And Gary Rixworth says, yeah, WNCX, not MMS. Jeff and Flash with the morning show going against Howard for a while. And by the way, as pointed out in the book, as Gary would know this, is MMS's management told those guys, do not talk about Howard on the air. Just ignore him. Just ignore him. And Howard came into town. The first thing he did is start attacking the morning shows. And people were flipping around the dial. And they'd go over to MMS, and they were the only station not defending themselves. Made people go, oh, these guys are wimps. So it didn't help them any. Haas and Pfeffer, my dad would make. Imus and Stern had a face for radio. That's probably true. Mark Miller says, I thought you said it's legal. Yes, things that are legal doesn't mean that you should go out and do them. I said you can go out and do it. I didn't say you ought to go out and do it. And this guy said that I specifically told people, please go out and flip off cops. Teach them all a lesson. Flip them all off. Flip every cop off you see. It's not what I said. Unfortunately, there are people out there, and I think some of these people actually watch my videos, who watch my videos, and then they start watching a video, and I mention something that's near and dear to them, and they stop hearing what I'm saying, and they just start writing angry emails. And I said specifically, I said, this court has ruled that you are allowed to flip off the police, but I wouldn't recommend it. I said specifically I wouldn't recommend it. So there you go. And I'm going to end on this because it's 3 o'clock. KWLDWD, the man, said you did not say flip off a cop. You said if you want to waste your time getting pulled over, then go ahead, which is exactly what I said. So I'm going to end right here, and I apologize, but I've been drinking the water today, and I haven't lost my voice yet, but I'm about to, I think. But I think the experiment works. As I mentioned at the top, I moved my camera about 3 inches this way using a tripod, and I think this is how I'm going to do this in the future, but we'll see how it looks, because the key is I've been reading this. I'm trying to look at the camera while I read, which is better than how I used to have it doing this. So that's it. I will see you, as always, hopefully, next Sunday, same time, same place. Until then, behave yourself. Bye-bye.